everybody, it's Alicia here from Featherweight 38 and our sewing group Sewing with Clickety, and I'm going to talk to you guys about a simple and easy project to do, making placemats. So I actually made placemats when I was 12, when I was really new at quilting and starting out, and these are a little bit more complicated than the ones that I made when I was 12, and I'll show you exactly how I did those ones in a second. But the reason why they had me start out with placemats was because it's a simple and easy project to do, and it doesn't take a lot of time, and you won't get as frustrated as like cutting out little tiny pieces to do quilt blocking. So to make a placemat, you well, for me, I just kind of came up with the size that I wanted. So this was what I thought of in my head, and I did square as opposed to oval because I was going to use a vintage attachment to attach the bias binding, and I'll get to that in a second. Obviously, at the end of the day, I ended up rounding the corners because the points weren't working out for me either. So what you basically do, you could honestly lay out your big piece of fabric. You get two pieces of fabric. So I did the gingerbread men on one side, and it's really hard to tell, but this white actually has snowflakes on it. And I ended up cutting each individual square and then cut the warm and natural because that's what I put in between it. And I cut that out, and then I literally sat there and very meticulously lined up both the gingerbread square, the snowflake square, and the warm and natural square. What you could have done is honestly laid out the big piece of fabric, laid out the big piece of warm and natural, and then laid your top layer on, and then cut it to size, but that might pose some difficulty too. So in that aspect, do what you feel best. I ended up cutting each individual one out. So what you'll end up doing, and this is a practice one that I did, so you see that the fabric's a little uneven, and that's okay because at the end of the day I'm going to take a rotary cutter and a ruler, and I'm going to size this up to make it even. Here's another one. See how I size that up to make that even. And when you quilt these, you want to cut them a little bit bigger than what your original size is, because as you're stitching them, if you end up doing the double face quilted fabric, it will shrink as you go in. So once you get your fabric sandwiched together between the three layers, you will end up going and drawing a diagonal line if you do the quilted face fabric. And I got these instructions from Sewing with Nancy, and I will take a picture of this and stick it in the comment section. But you will end up, and that's where I got the directions with the warm and natural. So if you want to, you can just follow the directions here with sandwiching the fabrics together. But then you'll take your fabric pencil and you'll draw your diagonal lines according to these directions if you end up doing it this way. And then after that, you just safety pin the sandwiches together so that way it holds your fabric in place. So once you've done that, I ended up using this walking foot that was designed for the Featherweights from the Featherweight shop. And the reason why I liked this is because I could set my lines to whatever size that I wanted them to be, and they're going to come out even and crisp. So on those diagonal lines that you sewed, you will then take your walking foot and you'll stitch a line. And then from that first line, you'll set this to how far you want it to be. And I think that I ended up stitching out an inch over. So from that line that you just stitched, you'll set the bar on that line, and then you'll stitch again. And then you just keep moving down. And it will give you those nice, even, crisp lines. So with the the quilted, I keep having to look, the double face quilted fabric, you will just sew one way, and then you'll come back over and you'll sew down the other way. And that's where it can kind of get complicated, going back and forth and like having to adjust your bar. So an easy alternative to placemats that you could do for quilting purposes is you could take your fabric, and once you have it sandwiched together, you can honestly just do diagonal lines. And let's just say that these are 2 inches apart. And you'll take your chalk and you'll draw those lines on your fabric. And then you'll take your walking foot and you'll stitch that first line. And then you'll set this to, if you've chalked the line, you'll just set it to the chalked line. So, and then you'll just stitch over, and then you'll have those nice even lines. I like this because it helps you keep track. When I first did placemats, I did not have this walking foot, and you don't need this walking foot to do it. I actually just chalked out my lines, had my fabric safety pinned together, and I just sewed on the chalked lines and then went and squared it up or evened it up. And then once you do that, then you're going to use the bias binding. So this right here is actually single fold bias binding, and you can find this, honestly, you could probably find it at Walmart. I got these at Joann Fabrics. Any fabric store is going to have them. And for the vintage attachment, you have to use the single fold. You can't use the double fold. I learned the hard way with that, and ended up going back to the fabric store like, what, 2 or 3 times, Stephen? Quite a lot. So you'll put that around your, you'll pin it around your placemat, and then you can either just stitch along that line, or if you have the vintage bias binder attachment, which I'll take a picture of and stick in the comment because I don't have it sitting here with me, you'll feed the binding through and it will sew it on there for you. The attachment is a little tricky to use, and honestly, if I have time over this weekend, I will try to do another placemat because I'm 95% done with these, but they all need binding on them. So, and I can show you how to use that at vintage attachment. You can see that I have not quite perfected it. This was the first time that I ever used the attachment. But you can very easily just fold the bias tape, and I've actually got one open in this bag. This is what it looks like. And if you end up wanting to stitch it without using the vintage attachment, then you would get the double fold, because you would just put one end here and then you would fold it over and pin and just stitch along there. This is what the single fold looks like, and it honestly just feeds through the attachment and goes across here. But if you need help with that, we're all here to help you out, and you can feel free to ask questions. So I hope that this was somewhat informative, and hopefully it doesn't seem too overwhelming. Again, we're here in this group to help support one another and teach one another. Like I said, I'm still learning, and just to kind of inspire people. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That's what we're here for. And thank you again for joining us at Featherweight 38, Sewing with Clickety.